It's time to shake it up. It's time to welcome you to the season 19 of the Productized Podcast. I'm André Marquet, and this season is all about creating change together with Productized 2025. Been having conversations with product leaders, designers, visionaries shaping the future of our industry and society at large. And today's guest is someone who's not just a designer, he's helping redefining what design means in our interconnected, intelligent, but ever more complex world. Manuel Lima is head of design at Interos.ai, a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, a celebrated TED speaker, startup mentor, and author of 4 best-selling books, including his most recent, The New Designer, Rejecting Myth and Embracing Change, has been named one of the 50 most creative and influential minds by Creativity magazine, and has spent over 15 years building teams and products at Google, Microsoft, Nokia, RGA, and beyond. Welcome to the Productized Podcast. It's an honor to finally have you on the show.
The honor is on mine. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Manuel. So I've actually been following your work for many years, especially since you gave, I would say, a classical TED talk, maybe, 11 years ago or so. And you obviously exploded in popularity for people that were not so into the design or visual design or even infographics world. Before we dive in, I really want to warm up a little bit with some teaser questions, if you don't mind, of course.
For sure.
So what's one change that you've made in your life that had a big impact? And I know that you've lived outside of Portugal. Now you're back. Maybe that's a change. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I would say a fairly recent change was going through divorce and having to really rediscover who I am as an individual, as a person. And that led me to a multitude of experiences that have been immensely enriching. In the process, I learned to dance, something that I didn't do all my life. I think I was just too stuck in my own mind. And now for me, dance is a form of therapy, a form of releasing my own sort of expression, but also, yeah, getting to know my limits a little bit to a certain degree. So I
What kind of dance are you into?
techno, psytrance, electronic dance. Yeah, it's been a fascinating sort of discovery for me. And again, I was in this relationship for 20 years and my life was very different. I was very much, work, family, career, family oriented. And the divorce just made me open myself to many different aspects of life. And it's been a crazy journey. It's been a journey, but it's been really like the biggest journey by far has been inwards, getting to know myself better and getting to know who I am as an individual, not as a parent, as a husband, but really as an individual.
Yeah, I think it's a common story. People, they divorce and suddenly they realize they have to learn new skills. Actually, that's one of the questions I had here, which is half answered in a way, which is if you could instantly master a new skill, what would that skill be? And I guess it took you some time to grasp dancing, or it was just inside you and you just never allowed yourself to release that inner dancer that you have.
It is definitely inside me as it is inside of all of us. And I think the reason we don't do more of it is because we're just, again, stuck in social norms and social conditioning, blocking us from like expressing ourselves. And this is just one of many ways you can express yourself, right? But I think it was definitely that discovery. But I would say self-love, empathy, is definitely a skill that is a lifelong journey. You have to like own and practice every single day.
Empathy has in self-empathy, or empathy like
Both.
in a more...
I think everything stems, from my recent discoveries, I think everything stems from self-love. If you really love yourself to a great degree, despite your imperfections, I think you are much more able to love others, to empathize with others, to understand their hurdles and their struggles, and just be a more compassionate human being altogether. And that is great, both as a partner, but also as a parent, but also as a coworker, right? As a person that you are collaborating with, because compassion, empathy is incredibly important for any team that you are building, any sort of collaborative project that you are involved in.
And more or less on that note, what's a product or company that you think is doing things right. And when I say things right, I mean vision and execution, right? I mean,
Right.
they have the right vision, but they're also executing right towards that specific vision.
It's always tough to say there is a company that's doing something right. It's the same way that we tend to say that, this person is good or bad. I think we all are.
Or products, if you
Yeah.
want, if you prefer.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've always been, again, a fan of Amazon because Amazon, they have really like put customer at the center from their early days, right? It's not so much about the price. It's really about the convenience. And they're really focused on convenience. Like the fact that you can just make it super easy to just purchase, like one single click, one single button.
Even in Portugal, I mean, I would not expect you to say that now that you are living here in Portugal, where the Amazon experience is not as seamless as I guess you had it
At all. And that's what I miss it. I miss the Amazon experience that I had when I was living in the US for sure. Because and that's the main experience that I can think of. The experience of Amazon, yeah, putting customers always like at the center, right? The aspect of convenience, but it's the mentality that goes well beyond a website. And people say, oh, it's just a website. It's just, even Google, it's just a website. No, there's like an amazing amount of infrastructure that has to be geared towards putting customer at the center, right? Moving warehouses close to different addresses so that instead of just 2 days or 3 days, it takes like hours. Like all of that needs to happen when you put customer at the center, right? Of your mission, of your vision. And that changes everything. The website, the user experience of the website itself, the product that we might call it, is just one of many facets, right? You have to think really holistically at a brand as a service. And all areas need to converge towards that mission, which is in Amazon's case, making as easy as possible for people to purchase goods. And so I think that's one aspect. But again, as with all things, as with human beings as well, there's no perfect company. There's aspects of Amazon that I'm not so much of a fan of, but this customer-centric mentality, I think is definitely something that many other products can learn from.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised you're saying Amazon because reading your books, do you do have, I'm not pretending I've read all your books or everything you've written. Parts of what you've written tend to be a little bit, let's say, more holistic and sociological in many ways. So Amazon is probably the poster child for, bad capitalism and consumerism that we have in the world nowadays. So how do you, is this Manuel, that inner conflict of the good that the capitalistic society gives us, but also the tensions and some of the, criticisms that we might be allowed to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I do mention, especially in my last book, I am very critical of companies that are doing evil, through dark patterns and things of that nature. Amazon is, well, yes, there's definitely a few instances where their practices you might think it's unethical. Even though my focus on the book is more so on companies that are really wrecking the human mind for profit. The TikToks of the world, the YouTubes, the Instagrams, I think they are really like trying to play the human mind in a way that is very detrimental for our own sanity. And they are playing also with the human mind, not just of adults, but also teenagers. So yeah, I can, there's definitely conflict and I can see the good things in, in some companies and also the bad things also because I've worked for many of these companies. So I kind of know the ins and outs and I know there's not only bad parts of it. There's not only bad players. There's a few good players. There are people that actually want to make a change, but for one reason or the other, it's this change, fails to happen at the degree that we should be focusing on.
I would say
inspired, educational,
overwhelming, very practical,
challenging,
thought-provoking,
meaningful,
enthusiastic,
nice people, innovation,
and fun.
Product growth mindset.
new connections.
Join us at the coolest product management environment this October in Lisbon.
All right, so let's dive into the heart of it, this big monster out there, the change that needs to be done. And that's exactly what this season is about, creating change together. It's a process of lots of people and your work seems to be a masterclass in exactly that. In your latest book, let's get into the new book. It's called The New Designer. The book has come out 1 year ago or so. Challenges the conventional myth of the design world. And The question is, what's one myth you think product designers and managers urgently need to outgrow?
Well, the notion that quantity is always better.
Mm-hmm.
This idea, the paradox of choice that we are so attached to, that more, more, more. And when in fact, we know that more is not always better. There's a lot of studies that have, let's say that you are in a stand selling multiple products. Sometimes the quantity itself doesn't mean that you're going to sell more.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I see happening all the time in a product environment, which is more features, more, more, more. And it could lead to some sort of paralysis. There is this incredible design principle that I love, which talks about this duality between functionality and flexibility, usability and flexibility. So, and this is actually what I've seen happening in Nokia. It's basically tells us that as the flexibility of a system tends to increase, its usability tends to decrease. So think about a remote that you had on a TV. Back in the day, you couldn't do that much with it, right? Just turn it on and off, change the volume, change the channel. That's it.
That's it.
From a flexibility, really low. But from a usability, it was perfect. There's no way you can get it wrong. Now look at what we have in most TV remotes. So many
The
buttons.
Netflix button, the Amazon
Buttons.
Prime button.
All colors of the rainbow, right? All shapes of buttons, squares, rectangles, like you name
So
it,
true.
diamonds. But what happens, right? So yeah, flexibility is great. I mean, you could probably turn on your microwave with that thing, but like from a usability standpoint, it decreases dramatically to a point where if you had someone like, let's say, a grandparent at home or something, you would have to like literally like cover things so that they don't get it wrong. So this is what I see happening all the time. Nokia, in many ways, I think fell through that crack, which is they were so much focused on flexibility, making the most flexible, adding features to a point where usability got jeopardized. And then, of course, came the iPhone, which is the opposite. Not a lot of flexibility. You only had a set of apps. But from a usability standpoint, it was incredible. Not to mention, of course, other interactive mechanisms and so on. But this duality, I think it's one of the most critical problems that I see happening in product development. It's like, there's never enough, right? There's almost like this greed for like more features, more. But sometimes more is not always better, right?
Right.
And that
Yeah,
is,
and in product we call it feature creeping, right? Which is
yeah,
when you
feature
just
creeping. Absolutely. And then, of course, we need to understand that. And then everything is screaming for attention. And I think when everything is important, nothing is, right? Because what tends to happen is like, hey, I want this feature to stand out. I want this feature to also stand out. I want this new thing. And all of a sudden, as an experience, as a user experience, everything is screaming. And what does that happen? Like what happens is that users become numb to it. They just become literally overwhelmed by this experience. And no matter how great the design is, there is a limit to human sort of understanding, to human cognition. That's something that I would love for us to really grasp, like this, the limitations of our own sort of capability.
And we are so limited. I mean, all these psychological studies that I've come to find is that humans are really easy to trick. Humans are really easy to have perceptual biases and dysfunctional, cognition. And you have a number of those tricks out there on the internet if you want to check them out. And some things are so crazy. It's like, it's different colors, but it's exactly the same color, just have different backgrounds and so on and so forth. It's like so many of these things out there. And they have this great quote on your book I was just going through by Paul Arden, one of the creative director of Saatchi & Saatchi. And I found it really insightful and inspiring, which is do not seek praise, seek criticism. Why did you quote him?
Well, I love this because I think this is what I also see happening all the time in design teams is like this idea of perfection. This is one of the things that I talk about.
Yeah,
this
it
myth
is.
for perfection. There's another one quote that I love by Salvador Dali that says, strive for perfection. You will never reach it. It's this ideal, right? It's this like illusion that you can reach it. But so I think there's this idea of perfectionism attached to the idea of design. And when I do have someone new in my team, I almost want them to fail as soon as possible. I give them like a really easy project for them to intentionally fail. And what I mean by that is by fail, immediately you realize there are other alternatives that you can consider that you're not considering. what happens most often is designers get overly attached to an idea, and it's hard for them to dissociate an idea from themselves. This is just an idea. It's not me. It doesn't mean anything about me. So that's why they become defensive when someone is criticizing an idea, because they think the idea is a reflection on themselves when it's not. It's just
Right.
that. It's an independent thought that he just had. So
It's
breaking,
my baby syndrome, right?
it's my baby. I need to protect it. Absolutely. And you see this aspect happening in what people call brainstorm sessions. And I tend to be reluctant of brainstorm sessions because you see this happening all the time. As soon as someone voices an idea, their idea, they become overly attached to it. And all of a sudden, they're not discussing things in a very sort of objective way. It becomes a very subjective discussion because you are either with me or without me, or either attacking my idea or you are defending it. So, no, it's not your idea. It's an idea. So dissociating yourself from ideas is absolutely critical for being a solid creative professional. Because again, what you want to avoid is getting stuck into the same idea, going down this rabbit hole and seeking validation, seeking confirmation bias that this idea is the best one, when it might not be. Instead, what I advocate for the book is like, go broad, explore many ideas instead of one, right? So this quote is really like exposing yourself, because that's how you grow. That's how you find really the best idea. That's you find many different ideas. And it's this myth of perfection that I think it's important for us to deconstruct.
And again, in your book, you have this very nice paragraph. I mean, probably more, but this one stuck with me, which I'm going to just quote for a few seconds, because you were speaking about how entrepreneurs and startup founders like Steve Jobs have this hero culture, and then you said something which stuck with me, which was, while their achievements are worthy of recognition, the hero cult they embody propagates the wrong idea that great design, like art, is about the singular mind. Anthropologist Daniel Miller explains how, despite the contemporary focus on the user, design is still tied to the notion of the luminary intellect. Design in general tends to look upwards to the arts and crafts in emulation, writes Miller. Areas where it is the figure of the producer as artist or craftsperson that commands attention, rather than the mere consumer. Hero stories in design can reinforce the old notion of design as a form of art for the cultural elite.
Yeah. Well said.
Well said, Manuel. But it seems that you are implying that we should recognize creativity as a larger cultural and collaborative process rather than an elitistic, individualistic phenomenon. But isn't that a comeback a little bit to the more socialistic views? I know, back from the 1930s, 40s of last century, which is, again, in opposition to the more capitalistic, individualistic Western societies that we are living in.
It is. I don't think it's political in a way, even though anything can be, any opinion, any sort of concept can be tied to politics, right? And so this one, I'd say it's a very socialist view on the world. But I do find the growth of individualism to be a concern for society at large, certainly for mental sanity on most people. And I talk about this in the book, right? It is certainly a concern, the growth of individualism. But I think it's also the hero culture that we have today, which we have always had, by the way. I think the hero narrative, the narrative of the single hero, is something that pervades space and time. There's already a civilization, religion that doesn't have some sort of like a myth around this hero, right? That comes and saves everyone. So humans have an immense attraction for this notion, this idea of a single hero that comes and saves the world, right? It's on everything from movies to literature, etc. Even today with Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk is the target of that adoration because people think that he has been this incredible genius that now is saving everything. For those who actually stand behind him and believe in what he's doing, that's what they generally believe. It's this hero cult, right?
Absolutely, hero cult.
What I mentioned in the book, and I talk about Steve Jobs as an example, is that, and even Elon Musk, if you start deconstructing his apparent success, you realize very soon that most of these achievements were not on his own, right? It was like a team creating something. It was like a help that he had from someone. So the fact that we just tend to forget all of it and just focus on one single individual as a genius, it's absurd. And I talk also about this in the book. back in the day, the genius, this idea of a genius, no one back, if you go back 500 years ago, you could not be a genius yourself. A genius was this abstract spirit that would help you achieve great work, right? An artist would have a genie by their side, right? This spirit that would help them. No one was individually, as a human being, a genius. But at some point, right, 500 years ago, this changed. All of a sudden, Galileo was himself a genius. He didn't need a genius, right? A genie. He was himself the genius. And that put such an amount of pressure on individuals, as it still does today, that we can be these geniuses, right? And everyone can be, right? This idea of meritocracy, that you can be a genius if you just put your heart and soul into what you're doing, right? Anyone can be, right, a genius on their own. We all have that capability. And that seems great in principle, but it puts a tremendous amount of pressure. And again, focusing on the individual, this is the culture where we think that the individual can come and save the world in a company as well. Design has been connected to art for so long, right? It's almost hard to dissociate, in part because still today, design is generally taught in design schools, architecture schools. So as a consequence, you still look at design as almost like an art, sort of
Craftsmanship.
That's hard, that's craftsmanship. And even how we look at designers, we still look at design pieces where? In museums, right? There's a testament of like how connected they are to art. To me, that's not design. That's like an artistic pursuit. And those design pieces that we see in the museums have been created not by teams, even though they were, but the only name that appears, as if you look at a painting in a museum, it's the single painter, right? It's the single designer. Alvarado and all these names from the past. When design has never been an individual pursuit, we had teams working on these things. Even art today, most big artists, most big names today, they don't work alone anymore. They have teams working with them. So this idea that there's a single genius that comes and creates this like incredible design solution that will, again, change and revolutionize the world is something that we have to demystify completely, especially today that we are working on digital platforms and tools that have teams of hundreds and hundreds of designers. I worked in those teams. I managed those teams. So I know that this is hardly like an individual pursuit. This is a gigantic sort of like team behind all of these things that we are building.
And so, a lot about it for sure. But as we're heading towards an era of networked intelligence, Gen AI, IoT, interconnected systems, in your view, how will this change the way we design, collaborate, and make decisions? And also, what is the role of the author if it takes responsibility as it is already, or the word responsibility is maybe displaced. It's going to be more and more important in the creative process, right? And lots of designers nowadays are just going to some of these AI tools to get drafts or first sketches. How do you see this evolving? Are we going to backtrack? Are we going to put more focus on the role of the individual contributor? How do you see this happening?
Yeah, I don't think we will. I don't think we will put more emphasis on the individual contributor. I think it's still going to be a vast teamwork. I mean, to be honest, collaboration, we need more of it at a global scale. And this goes to say, like, the biggest problems we are facing as a species, there are large collaborative projects. We're not going to be able to do them on our own, either as an individual country, as an individual city, right? We need collaboration, which just takes on many, many, many different scales. So this is always going to be absolutely paramount. But I think the challenge of AI, I always go back to photography. When photography came on into the picture, you might think, looking back, right, might think that artists were completely distressed by the launch of photography because it would question their way of living, their profession. But that's exactly not what happened. So when the photography came into the scene, artists actually embraced this new technology. They didn't really avoid it at any cost. They were actually very much receptive to it. And they were using this technology to perfect the art. That's one element, right? To actually make their art even better. And on the other hand, you might think that most of what we think about contemporary art really surfaced through the advent of photography. If it wasn't for photography, we wouldn't have had all the incredible movements, because what art, instead of being this like external facing depiction of reality, became an inward facing pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't have things like expressionism, like surrealism, if photography wouldn't appear in the first place. So it was,
Yeah. It forced the evolution of painting towards a new level.
in many ways, photography was a blessing for painting because painting had to reinvent itself and had to look into all these different directions that it was not looking at all before. So I don't see new technology as always being negative. It has negative aspects to it, for sure. I mean, we can talk about those. But when it comes to design and AI, I actually think that AI coming into the picture and doing a lot more of the visual work, which will happen, it's already happening, will actually force designers. I think this is a good thing, a positive outcome, because it will force designers to design the invisible. And I talked a lot about this in the book. We can see this invisibility of design in service design right
Okay.
now.
Can you give some specific examples just that people understand what we're talking about here about
Yeah,
invisible design?
absolutely. So there is this project that I think I mentioned in the book called the No Waste Challenge. And this was a design project for us to solve issues on systems, right, at a system level. And the winning entry of this No Waste Challenge was this system to compost that it was just using remains of different food from different areas of a city in Japan and using this system to create a compost that was used in nature. So this is an idea that was won by a group, by a team of designers. So this is not the project that you might find more attractive to put in a portfolio, which, by the way, I think it's a thing of the past. But it is a design project nonetheless. It is invisible in the sense that you don't actually create anything. You are merely improving the connections between the system, right? So when we talk about service design, is a great idea, a great concept related to the invisibility of design, because a service might not be visual all the time, might not have a tangible element, right? It's how you greet a customer, right? If you are like talking to someone, it's how customers experience, how welcome they feel. And this is a multitude of touch points. So it's not always visual, it's not always tangible, but you still have to think about this in a systemic way as a service. So by AI coming into the picture and taking over a lot of the visual, tangible aspects of design, I find it's going to be a blessing because it would allow designers to really think about the systems, the invisible aspects of our planet, of our cities, of our environment, of society in general, which they can, in fact, be active agents of change. And we are not thinking about those contributions at the moment, but we should. And I think AI will force us to think in that way.
And you talked about embracing change and something obviously easier said than done, but how do you personally approach change, especially in the context of leading design in high stakes tech environments like the company that you're currently working for? You've also mentored teams across companies like Google, Microsoft, which are huge, like you said, hundreds of people working on some of these projects. What have you learned about creating a culture of creativity without chaos?
That is tough. And I think it goes back to open creativity can always be super challenging. I think having a solid understanding of requirements, right, of what you're trying to solve is always, always important. Because if I tell you like, oh, I need to create this, but why? The first question I'm going to ask is like, why would we need to create this? Like, why? There's no reason. So understanding the reason, the problem you're trying to solve, because designers at the very core, right, they are problem solvers. They are meant to solve a given problem. And if you don't understand the problem, if you don't really specify the problem, there's no way you can know if this design solution is better or worse than any other, right? Because then it becomes just a subjective intake. And I'm very against any notion of subjectivity in design because design is much more scientific based as we might think. So what I always go back to is the problem. What is the problem we're trying to solve? So if you are focusing on the customer, which design might not always be focused on the customer, we talked about Amazon, but that might not be the only sort of focus, right? This idea of centering it in the user is in many ways, and we can go back to that, a somehow outdated idea for me. If we focus our main stakeholder being planet Earth. But that's part of the journey, right? If we understand the problem, it allows you to focus and you can still be immensely creative within a set of boundaries, within a set of requirements. But if you don't know those set of requirements, it's really hard. It's really hard to come up with a solution. So, and that can be just talking to customers, talking to the target of this design solution. What is the problem? What are the needs that they are facing? What are the struggles that they are going through? This is the only way for us to design properly, is by truly, truly have a grasp on the problem you're trying to solve. Otherwise, it just becomes a very subjective pursuit.
So one of the things I hear from time to time about this teams, product teams that work with designers and product leaders, product managers, is this tension about the role of the designer, and for sure the role of the product manager also being redefined. But I think maybe the pressure is mounting on the role of the designer for the last 5 years, from what I understand it. So how do you think this team practitioners can practice more system thinking in a more systematic way that would allow for these teams maybe to work together and create together better than maybe releasing some of this tensions, which are important in a way, but also might not be blocking factors if they stuck in a way as well.
I think, yeah, I think this is definitely an issue that I pointed out in the book, Andre, and it's really this idea that we are becoming more and more siloed, right? We are becoming more and more separate from each other, and there's a lack of understanding on the big picture. I've led teams that whose designers, they were working on one single component of a design system, right? And when you are working at that minuscule scale, you lose the ability to see the big picture.
To
You
see
don't really know
the forest.
Yeah, you lose the forest, right? You lose the ability to see, great, this component is certainly it's part of a bigger whole. Like, what is that whole? And this is also like why a lot of the dark patterns that we see being created by designers, sometimes, I'm not going to say always, but sometimes designers generally don't have a clue of what they are building because they are working at that minuscule scale. They don't see the big picture. They don't see the final outcome of what actually being pushed into the user because they are only working on one slim of that product. So I think that is definitely a reason for issues, for problems of all sorts, including the designers themselves and even product managers, because they are working on such a tiny sort of silo. They are frustrated. They are like really, really working on problems. They have a scale that they're not even prepared for. It's really antagonistic to their own ambition. So I think there's a great quote that I have on the book as well that has become my mantra, which is, if you are designing a chair, always think about the next larger context. Okay. So always think about the next larger context of your design solution. If you're designing a chair, think about the room. If you're designing a room, think about the house. If you're designing a house, think about the urban development plan. So by doing this sort of like effort of always understanding 1 or 2 or 3 levels above your design solution, you truly will understand how your design is being incorporated into many other parts and what the whole looks like. And that is the genesis for me of ethical behavior. If you just say, I'm just doing my job, I don't even know or care how this at the end will be used as a whole, that's part of the problem, right? You are being part of the problem. You should be curious enough to at least see what you are creating at the end. What is your contribution accounting for, right? What is it adding to other things? Like, what is that final thing? And some designers don't really see that, either because they're not able to see it, they're not curious enough, or sometimes they are intentionally left aside from seeing that big picture. But it is absolutely paramount. So if we want to think in systems, we always have to, again, go up multiple levels to understand the major creation that's actually being at stage.
Yeah, so important to go the extra ladder to try to see the mountain. Now I want to zoom in on something special, because Manuel, you're not just joining us here on the podcast, which is great, by the way, but you're also giving a live keynote at Productized conference, and we're thrilled to have you for sure. You've spoken at over 100 conferences. That's what I checked there on your speaker page around the world. What made you say yes to Productize, and what makes the event stand out for you? Is it just because this is your home country and, you don't have to fly? Or is there something you really want to share with the world? I'm really curious.
Well, I think partially that's one of the reasons, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. Yeah, it's in my home country, and I think I do love events like this that are happening in Portugal, right? Because I've been into many events like this in other places, but happening in Portugal is always something that I respect and I care deeply about.
Thank you.
But also because this, it's very attached to my latest book, The New Designer. And I think where you can start making a change, where you can start having a positive impact through all the things that I wrote and all the things that I'm fighting for is on product design teams, right? Is in fact working with engineers, telling some of these stories, having a conversation with both engineers, product managers, and designers on how we can actually build products in a more responsible and ethical way. It's great that I write a book and anyone can read it, but if I can influence product teams building better products, again, in a more responsible and ethical way, that's incredible, right? So conferences like this can certainly help, at least building a level of awareness by those product people into the different ways that they can come up with better product solutions.
And well, I had a little question just before we wrap up, which is how do you influence inside your teams? Do you give them copies of your book and say, hey, read this?
Yeah, have
No,
this next your nightstand.
no, just I'm curious, right? Because inside teams, it feels a little bit like, and maybe I'm pushing a little bit too much the analogy, but it's like with your own kids, it's different, right? You cannot force them too much because there's always this family tension for your kids. You better not push too much the rope. So, how do you influence inside walls?
That's a great, I mentioned this a lot actually in the book. Like, how do you influence other people? I think that's actually
Yeah,
one of,
not just outside, because obviously
right,
you're an author and you have
right.
a fellowship and readership outside all over the world, but also inside doors, right? Inside the teams that
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. And I can talk to you about this. It's funny that you mentioned about kids because I do have to say, I find so many similarities between the role of being a parent, being a teacher, and being a manager. I think they all resemble in one way and understanding the limits, right? Are that to push them in the right direction, but not over so that they lose a sense of autonomy, right? So having that sort of like subtle balance between guiding, but not pushing too much is something that I think is really incredibly, again, similar between those three roles, between being a manager, teacher, and the father. In my case, I talk about influence in the book quite a lot. And one of the things that I also demystify is the notion that a great idea will be enough. We find many designers with this illusion that if only I have this great idea, everything will solve itself. And it's absolutely an illusion because a great idea will go anywhere if you don't have the ability to sell your idea. And by selling your idea, it's the ability to influence. And we always, always, always have someone that we have to sell to. No one. There's no profession that you don't have either a manager, a customer, an academic advisor, like whatever the role you have, you always have to convince someone that your concept, this idea, this notion that you just created, this paper, this theory is great. And having that ability, building the right tools within you to actually influence and persuade people is one of the greatest investments you can have for your career. And so I talk a lot about social skills because many people focus primarily on the hard skills, like being great at Figma or doing this. It's nonsense. You might do that in the beginning of your career. But if you actually want to become a leader in your space, it's much more about how to persuade and influence other people. So that's one thing I would say. Then the other aspect to your question is I get this comment quite often from people. Yeah, your book is great, design ethics and responsibility, but like, how can I individually make a change in my company? Individually, I cannot change capitalism. I cannot make any dent. I cannot change the mission of my company. Who am I, to even think that I can do that? And I think there's a couple of ways you could tackle that problem. One is, yes, it's tough, it's hard, but it's not impossible. If you look at any major social change movement that happened in the past 100 and 200 years, it always starts with an idea, one single person, and it contaminates others, right? Always. So just looking at history, we know it's possible. So it can be done. Even though it's hard, it can be done. The second thing is like, try. first, before you even give up and say you cannot make a change, try it. See where it goes. Come to your product team and say, hey, I don't think this is an ethical thing we are building. Like, I really question the way we are achieving this outcome. Just, be open and confront them, see what happens. Then, of course, if you actually are genuine to yourself and made an effort to make a change in your workplace, right? Then you can say, well, if it doesn't work, then I could either have two options. Either I find another place to work, which there are many other companies that can actually be more fulfilling to your mission, to what your values, or I can stay here and fight a bit more. Don't fight to exhaustion, right? But there are other places. If you cannot change that company, that's fine. You can change other place and you can actually have more impact in another sort of role.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what I would say to people. But going back to your specific question about me individually, I think it's always leading by example.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back to, again, this triad of being a teacher, a father, and a manager.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes a long way if you lead by example,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not really like preaching so much as you are exemplifying through your behaviors, through your attitudes, through the way you do things, you achieve things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think leading by
Yeah.
example,
Which is a really, really hard thing to do sometimes.
which
right?
is really hard thing to do.
Because
but
you have to be a grown up or every single day. You have to be very
Absolutely.
self-aware every single moment, every single second.
Absolutely. And I keep saying to my team, you cannot win every battle, but you have to be smart about picking the right battle. You cannot just go every time I don't agree with it. It's like, then you're a really hard person to work with, right?
Exactly.
It's like, this person is just always complaining, always disagreeing. Like,
Yeah.
you have to pick your battles. And that comes with experience, that comes with time, right? And again, one extra social skill that you need to develop is learning this dance of, again, persuading people, working with people.
Which battles you can win. It's definitely a very hard skill.
Not
to grasp.
being too soft, but also not being considered like a pain in the butt. How do you strike the right balance? It's really a dance that is really hard for us. But the thing is, a lot of these social skills, we are not taught in business schools or design schools or engineering schools. We only learn the hard skills. And then
Well, we can always start Dance for Designers 101 or
thing is,
product
like,
managers.
immediately as you join the workforce, you realize how limiting these hard skills are. It can only get you to a certain point.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, you might be great at doing your job, but that's it. I mean, your job is so much more than that. And you realize and the book, hopefully it helps people becoming aware of the importance of social skills and hopefully make many of these people, like many of the readers, want to build up those social skills because they are absolutely paramount for your career, for your success.
Absolutely. Manuel, such a powerful way to end this episode. That's really a wrap for this podcast, Productized Podcast. Big thank you to you, Manuel, for sharing your valuable insights. We can have stayed here for much, much longer for sure. But before you go, do you have any upcoming projects or initiatives that you'd like to share? And how can listeners reach out to you? What's the go-to place you have a page, manuellima.com, if I'm not mistaken, but is there any specific way you like to interact with your listeners, readers, etc.?
No, I mean, I am always changing. I used to use Twitter, but certainly not anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the best way is mslima.com is actually my personal website.
Yeah,
Or
MS
just
Lima.
reach out to me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I use both of them quite often. Just, again, reach out to me, send me a direct message. I'm always like eager to talk and understand problems and whatever struggles that you are going through, or even just to share ideas and whatnot. So I'm always open to those kind of discussions and engagements. And follow me on those networks as well, but either LinkedIn or Instagram, because I'm always posting interesting content that related to my book and upcoming events as well.
And I guess you also get a lot of stock, a lot of inspiration for some of the cases you pinpoint on your book from your travels and a lot of things you do. All right. So everyone tuning in, don't forget to follow Productize on LinkedIn as well. Subscribe to the podcast and leave us a comment with your thoughts on today's episode. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. And remember, change is something we can all create together. See you in the next episode or at the Productize conference in October.
I would say
Inspired. Educational.
overwhelming. Very practical.
challenging,
Thought-provoking.
Meaningful.
Enthusiastic.
Nice people.
innovation, and fun.
Product growth mindset.
New connections.
Join us at the coolest product management environment this October in Lisbon.